Can you keep a secret?
Welcome to Decoding TV's coverage of Skeleton Crew, the new Star Wars series that's streaming right now on Disney+. 2 episodes have been released. Patrick Klepek and I have watched 2 episodes of the show. It's going to be releasing weekly, I believe, every Tuesday from now until the end of the series. And there's going to be 8 episodes. Patrick Klepek, in one sentence or less, should people watch Skeleton Crew on Disney+?
I think so. I'm having a great time with the show. Do I expect this is going to be a show in which David explains a bunch of criticisms and I go, I know. I don't care. I have a suspicion it's going to be one of those shows. I'm going to acknowledge so many faults in it. It is just wearing all of its inspirations, not even on a sleeve. It's just a big highlighted t-shirt. It's just like, here are the things I was inspired by. And the truth is, like, that's the stuff I grew up on. And it gets close enough. I'm intrigued enough by kind of like the low stakes fantasy that's about to play out. I find the cast really charming. I think the kids are really good. I forget what that little blue kid's name is, but every time he says Neil, we love Neil. We love Neil. And so I find myself charmed, perhaps a little underwhelmed. My hopes are a little higher, but excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, I mean, the show has incredible pedigree. John Watts, David Lowery, who's made some of the greatest films of the last decade. You know, the Daniels directed the Best Picture award winner from that year. So it's like, okay, let's see if what stamp these directors can leave on the series. Okay, what do I think of Skeleton Crew? I think it's a very interesting exercise in how far you can stretch an IP. That's what I think it is. Is it good? I don't think so. I don't think this is a good show. Is it watchable? Absolutely. And if I had kids, which I don't, I think like this would be a very enjoyable thing to watch with one's kids. Did your kids watch this, Patrick Klepek?
No, the timing didn't work out. I think I might try and go back this weekend and see if my oldest could get into it. It's just like, I saw some people going like, it's a little violent. I was like, you don't remember the 80s. It's in terms of its approach to violence, depiction of violence is very much of the same time. The Amblin Entertainment, Spielberg, like all that stuff that's pulling from is the same level of violence that was in films that were targeted and popular with kids like myself. And so I don't think it goes anything beyond what, you know, an 8-9-year-old would be. I mean, each child's different, but yes, I would be fully comfortable watching this with my oldest.
I think if I was a kid and watching the show, I'd be really into it. You know, like I think it's clearly made for kids. Now, I know also Star Wars in general was made for kids, right? But like this is really made for
kids. Can you
say
in general anymore if you're taking in the entirety of what is under the umbrella of Star Wars?
The original films. How about that? The original
Yes,
films.
Because I think if you were to say Star Wars, it's a children's entertainment like targeted at adults, and that has led to a lot of confusion in the franchise, who it's for, what it's capable of.
Right. Like, no, that's a great point. That's a great point. But like, I think this is clearly targeted at kids. In my opinion,
agree.
Right?
I agree.
It's clearly targeted at kids.
It's meant to be. It's targeted at kids, but can be enjoyed by adults, and that's just fundamentally different than a lot of, especially the television shows in Star Wars have been. I think the movies have better straddled the line between those things, but on TV they have been very directed at adults in a way that is not all that consistent with the series.
I'm not loving it so far, but the thing is, there are some potentially interesting like Star Wars lore aspects to the show that I'm kind of like, I'm really curious where they're going to go with those. And also I'm just interested to see like what happens when the Daniels direct this Star Wars TV show. Like, is anything interesting going to happen? You know? So that is going to keep me chugging along, and I'll try to be as least negative as possible as we go along here on Skeleton Crew. Let me talk a little bit about what I mean by the stretching the IP though. Like this is just Goonies in the Star Wars universe, right?
Sure. Yes.
That's really what it is. It has all the trappings of an 80s thing, like an 80s show movie targeted at kids, or an 80s show targeted at kids. And it's like, wow, like they really went super far with that. Like it's almost to the point where like the Star Wars tie-ins are barely existent. You know what I'm saying? Like It's when I say it's an exercise, something like it's like, okay, when you think of Star Wars, what are all the components of Star Wars, right? Like, there's the Death Star and the Force and Jedi and the Republic or the New Republic and the First Order. All the it's all makes up this bit. Like, it's like what I think Skeleton Crew is like an exercise in what's the smallest, tiniest chunk of that we can take, mash it together with an 80s movie, and still have something we can call Star Wars. Because so many things of the show are unrecognizable. Like, the kids live in a suburb, for instance, right? Like, future space suburb. Like, we've never seen that before in Star Wars. Now, I understand it's a big galaxy, and there's probably suburbs out there, but we've never seen them before. And also, at Adin, the world they live in, has no place in Star Wars lore, and so it's like. So that's what I mean when I say it's like an IP exercise. It's like
I think it's trying to have its cake and eat it too, in the sense that I mean, these kids are surprised by stars. They should see stars, and you know what I mean. Like, there's
because there's this huge barrier that blocks them from seeing stars,
and they're being propagandized into something called the Great Work,
right?
And I strongly suspect
from Star Wars. That is from Star Wars lore. We can talk about that, but yeah.
But it's all to say, I strongly suspect something is going on this planet that is more like it's. And what I mean by have its cake eat its too is like, it seems like they worked backwards from like want to do Goonies and Star Wars, and then how do we justify that? And the Star Wars universe absolutely could leave space open for like some weird Republic experiment or whatever. Like, was some different version of like running the universe that allows them to have suburbia and like future bikes and like pull a bunch of this stuff out of 80s movies that doesn't make sense. It doesn't line up with our conception of Star Wars, because like they can pull the rug out. It won't be a rug because I'm anticipating it happening, even though I don't know the precise explanation of like, wow, that's not how the universe is. It's just this one planet in which we were doing a weird little thing on. And I think
it's
that's
like the kind of suburban version of Wakanda. That's like,
yeah,
like no one knows about it. It's kind of sequestered off on its own. But I think it'll be interesting to see how they navigate that. But basically what I'm trying to say is, for the most part, this doesn't need to take place in Star Wars universe yet. Like, maybe it'll become clear why that's important, but this could just be like, so little of this ties back into Star Wars, other than, the kid's super into Jedi, right? Like, so I guess that could be a thing. This great work thing that you mentioned, the sort of overall plot of the Republic and this taking place, when this exactly takes place. But like, it doesn't feel as essentially Star Wars as other things feel, right? And that may or may not be a good thing. Let's talk about what actually happened in the episode. Skeleton Crew takes place during the following the fall of the Galactic Empire and during the New Republic era. In other words, it takes place between the events of Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens. The show begins on a mysterious planet called Adin, which has not previously appeared in Star Wars lore. And it's basically like a futuristic version of an American suburb. And the four characters we're going to follow primarily are Wim, a kid who loves the Jedi, but doesn't do well at school. He's kind of a screw-up. Neil, who's Wim's friend, he has an elephant face. That's his primary characteristic. Fern, a Nepo baby, whose mom is a bigwig, but Fern hates the buttoned-up life. She's a rebel. And KB, an Asian character who wears space glasses and knows how to fix things. That's how you know we are back in the 80s. We're still doing this, Patrick?
It never left, David.
We're still doing the Asian character with glasses that fixes things? I guess she's a girl now, so we've made some progress. Anyway.
Everyone gets to be a stereotype, David. That's what progress is about.
Well, to its credit, Adin is seemingly like a super propagandized environment where everyone is raised to be a bureaucrat, right? There is this thing called the Great Work that they're preparing all these people on the planet for. Everyone's being trained to be part of the Great Work. Now, when you look up Great Work on Wikipedia, the Great Works were a group of projects undertaken by the Galactic Republic under Supreme Chancellor Lina So during the High Republic era. The Starlight Beacon, a massive space station constructed on the frontier of the galaxy, was one of So's great works. Other great works that So had planned include the Republic Fair, construction of communications relays throughout the galaxy, the negotiation of a treaty between the Quarren and Mon Calamari, cracking the code on back to cultivation, and other technological innovations, I should say. So, anyway, now the High Republic era was between 500 BBY and 100 BBY, hundreds of years before the events of Star Wars Episode 4, right? Again, Skeleton Crew takes place between the events of Episode 6 and Episode 7.
Acolytes during the High Republic era.
Right. So this show takes place hundreds of years after the High Republic era, right? So is this some relic of the High Republic era, right? That's like somehow it's like the soldier in the jungle that didn't know the war ended years ago, like, or
right.
Is there some other more sinister thing going on with the planet of Aden? Who knows? But it's interesting that there's all these like signs of repression and other things that are odd. Like, for instance, there's a lot of droids on Aden, but in Star Wars, after BBY, after the battle of Yavin, droids go away because of their usage in the Clone Wars and other nefarious things, right? So it's like this is basically a planet/place like stuck in time, like kind of frozen in time, essentially. Mm-hmm. And I suspect we'll find out more about what's going on as time goes on. Any other theories, Patrick Klepek, about like what might be happening here on Aden?
No, because it's I just figure like it's got to be something like it's too obvious in the first episode, and I'll be curious, like especially if it's a High Republic thing where like the Acolyte was this like really spectacular,
right,
high profile, I think kind of disaster, like it taken as a total, not as a work of art, but just sort of as what happened in the culture and the rollout and like just kind of just a disaster. And it was part of like a big push by Star Wars in general to like do something in a different era.
Right.
And this would be kind of interesting. Like, oh, like it's set in like an era of Star Wars we're familiar with, but is going to harken back to this High Republic era as part of a larger strategy to pull things in from a period of Star Wars that we don't know much about. And it sounds like that's something like that is happening here. And I remain kind of curious to see how. I mean, they keep bringing up Aden, like what happens in the second episode with people, how they respond to people even suggesting that. Just makes me curious where all that leads.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, like, I didn't really enjoy the material with the kids, which is like 80% of the show. But the stuff about Aden and like what's going on there, like, and these people are being kept in this like repressed society, and they don't actually know what's going on out in the universe.
You wish
like,
the kids stayed here so we could have just been in this repressed society
yes,
a little longer.
Absolutely, like that's
let the kids go on the adventure, and then the camera pans down and goes back to the dad, and is like, "Time to go back to work."
What is Wendell's job? I want to see what his job is like.
Well,
like
I think it's a natural impulse though, because that is somewhat like what Andor is born out of, right? Like what is rebellion? Like Star Wars as a the first three films, like you join the rebellion, but you don't actually see what does it mean to commit political violence, like engage in rebellious activities. Like, and Andor explores that to a really like incredible degree. And here there is an interesting premise set up, and they're like, yeah, but like we need like a whimsical robot, and we got to go to spaceport. Like, bye.
Yeah. That basically summarized my. That's the thing. Is like it's not like I don't like everything. It's just like, oh, this part is really interesting, and then the part where the kids go on hapless adventures less interesting, which I know is the main show.
Yeah.
But anyway, what do we learn? What do we learn about these kids? Like Wim lives with his dad Wendell. He kind of like is the perpetual screw up. Like he's showing up late to tests. He has good intentions, but really he wants to be a Jedi. Really, right? He wants to be a Jedi.
Also, his dad sucks. Like, I'm sorry, but like, hey, Dad, can you read me a bedtime story? No, I got to work. Also, like, who listens to bedtime stories anymore? Grow up, son. Like, I don't know. I don't really blame the kid for acting out.
The dad's a busy guy. He's a single father. All right,
doing what? doing what work? Like we get like the fact that they keep his work mysterious obviously is going to be another shoe I think that drops within the show. But like there's like the show goes out of its way to be like, well, he would just like his dad to be around, and he can't.
I think it is explained what his dad does, like some program manager, something like that.
Yeah.
It's like they give a word to it, but you don't see what it is or anything like that. So I think we will find out at some point. But yeah, we see Fern and her friend KB, and Fern is the daughter of that woman, Carrie Condon's character, who's like this big wig, very important. And they discover a ship in the middle of the woods, and they decide to get in it, and they press some buttons, and it goes to space, and then a droid comes to life and directs them to a pirate outpost. Patrick Klepek, where I really felt like the IP was being stretched was in the opening scene of this show. There's a scene where this guy, Captain Silva, who I think we all believe to be Jude Law's character, because he speaks in a British accent and he's wearing a mask, and Jude Law is one of the biggest stars of the show.
I agree.
He shows up, and like there's this actually really cool scene where this like ship kind of rips into this other ship, like by extending these arms into the ship, and I thought those were really cool. And then I saw people like cock their blaster pistols, and I was like, that's weird. I've never seen that before. And it's like all this stuff is just meant to imitate pirate stuff. Like, but it's like it makes no sense in the context of the show. Like, so people are like cocking their blast. It's like that's a thing you do with a normal Earth gun. And I'm like, I feel like I'm the comic book nerd from Simpsons complaining about like you don't cock blasters in Star Wars, but it's like it just makes the whole thing feel like kind of this shameless like we're just mashing pirate things into Star Wars. Like when they go on the ship, right? They find all these like a pirate hat, and it's like, what? So this is just a society that happened to develop pirates as well. Like, why would they be wearing hats like that? Like it doesn't. Anyway, I feel like I'm taking crazy pills.
I mean, they look. I don't know if you saw it, but like there was kind of an opening crawl where they explained there are pirates, and I don't know why you're questioning the opening crawl.
I understand the concept of pirates existing. It's just more like, why would they have the aesthetics of Earth pirates? You know, like I understand pirates out there existing and greed being eternal, but why would they wear pirate hats that look like Earth pirate hats? You know, like that's
that I can't.
Why would their laser blasters need to cock like Earth guns? Like it's just like what like But whatever, no one cares. I'm just screaming into a canyon here with these complaints, right? So, but it's just kind of like, oh, like you really. I'll just say this, and then I'll try to move on for this, which is just like, I think by just like borrowing this pirate stuff, the show misses an opportunity to like imagine like how would pirates actually develop in ancient society, right? Like, what are different ways we could imagine pirates? It's like, no, let's just borrow the same shit. Like the look of it, the sound of it. We'll just borrow all the same shit, and that's fine. You know, it's like, okay, well, that's A, weird, and B, kind of boring. Rant over. Thank you for listening. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk, Patrick. Okay. But yeah, I thought the opening scene was interesting. Captain Silvo shows up. He's been shepherding along these pirates. He's like, we finally found some gold. They open up the vault. There is one credit in it. It's not enough to make people feel like their time has been worth it. And so there's a mutiny. And then the next time we see Jude Law, which I assume that's who it is, he's in prison. He shows up at the end of episode 2, along with the kids. He's going to break them out. And it's implied that he's a Jedi. So it's like, what's going on there? Because the Jedi was leading this pirate band? Again, assuming they're the same person, which I think we all think is true, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, thoughts on the Jude Law character such as it is right now?
I kind of hope there's more to it than just... I kind of hope he's not a Jedi and there's just a trick. And that's probably not the case. Probably is a Jedi, I guess.
Right. That's what I think. I think you're right. Like maybe he used some kind of like illusion to like make that happen, right? I think
well, because he speaks. It's not like it's like Yoda adjacent. Like when he emerges from the shadows, like the distance between us and that key is not so like far, you see, or like whatever he says. And then the way it floats is just it's kind of odd. Like it just like the way it's shot.
Mm-hmm.
And this episode is done by, David Lowery, who you and I have both praised. I don't think he really breaks through. Like I knew he directed episodes.
You did not see glimpses of the Green Knight's brilliance in episode 2 of Skeleton Crew, Patrick Klepek?
I was kind of bummed in myself. I was like, all right, like I know he's directing an episode of this. I thought Watts did the first 2, and he's a totally competent director. Like the Spider-Man movies look like fine. And got to cut to credits on the end of the second episode, directed by David Lowery. I was like, oh. Well, it's a television show. How fancy you probably can't get as fancy as you'd like, given the constraints of shooting someone else's television show. But that scene, I don't know. Like maybe I'm looking for something that isn't there. But there's just something sort of off about Jude Law's character and the way he uses the Force, whether it's the Force or something else. I don't know. The whole setup for this character seems like it's going to be something more than just like a Jedi. But maybe he is just like someone who tricks other people into thinking he's a Jedi. That would be like a more fun spin on, if we're going to start like pulling in all these different Star Wars bits. If there was a fun spin on them, like that would be somebody lying about being a Jedi in a world where Jedi are mythologized. Like that could be fun until the ruse is up.
Yeah, we'll see. All right, if he does turn out to be not a Jedi, you were onto it from the start, Patrick Klepek. You can say that. But yeah, there's a bunch of interesting things about the society they're living in at Aden. Like we said, they seem to be training up a whole bunch of bureaucrats for what purpose, unclear right now. There is this thing called, I think, the Great Barrier that is over the planet. It doesn't seem like it's a shield because they're able to easily go through it. I think it just stops them from seeing outside of it, right? Like, yeah. And stops people from seeing them, presumably, because their society is untouched. And so
can people even see the planet? Because they're like when the dad mentions that they probably have left the barrier, it's definitely like there's an exchange about like, well, ships, like the planet has a weird relationship with ships in general. Like people like either don't leave, don't come out. So I wonder if the whole
they're strictly forbidden from going through the Great Barrier. Right?
So to your Wakanda point, like is this like somehow like a forgotten planet? Like it went invisible and then just the world moved on from them.
I don't think we ever see it from above, do we? Like no. I don't think we ever see like an outside view of at Aden. So it's like
once we leave, it's always like forward facing in the ship. The ship.
Right, exactly, yeah. So kind of a cool concept. Like it's like, we haven't really seen that in Star Wars really before.
I will say though,
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. No, finish.
Well, I was gonna say like in Rogue One, we saw that there was this shield around the planet, right? But that's like a shield, and everyone knows it's a shield, and whatever. This is like, we don't even know what this is really, like what its purpose is or what it's doing, other than you can't see it, right? You can't see past it. What are you gonna say?
Well, the one bit I was confused on. And I guess it's not really a plot hole, but like this is an advanced ship. It doesn't know where it was last when it did a hyperspace jump, because they asked the robot droid to like check your memory banks. And like I get it, like okay, maybe he can't remember, like he's been out for a while, or that little creature like chewed through whatever. I can buy all that. But you're telling me that these futuristic ships like don't have a last point of like he said, we'll turn around. Which star? I was like, I don't know. Whatever the log says we were last at.
This is like, Patrick, there's a moment in the show where one of the kids presses like the power up button and like the ship slowly powers up from like right to left. And I have to say, it looks really cool. And if I was a kid, I would like freak out about that.
The ship looks great. I can't like that looked like a fucking awesome set. Like, like I have to imagine being on that ship. The way they constructed that looked incredibly cool. It was just one of those things where, like, just say like the kid, like Wim hit a button and erased the ship. I could buy that. He was touching they were all touching lots of buttons, and maybe that's what they did. But, like, I got over it. Like again,
I know exactly why. I know exactly why the ship couldn't find their last location though. It's because there wouldn't be a show otherwise. That's why. So,
but that's give me the line, right? Yeah, give me the line. Just say, well, I don't even need a good line. It's just like,
yeah.
you pressed erase log button. Oh, okay. Well, all right. Anyway,
they do find this droid SM-33, who ends up being like a pretty cool badass droid. I have to say, like at the end of the episode when he starts freaking owning people left, he's like murdering and maiming dudes left and right in that scene. I felt bad. I felt bad for the characters.
I mean, good droids across like a lot of the Star Wars shows, like even the bad ones. Like there have been really good. I don't know if that's like a specific department. Like I don't know what it is, but like across Mandalorian, like this, the Acolyte had Acolyte. Even Ahsoka had like a really like. There's just really good droid characters.
Star Wars has a great droid game. You know, like
it does.
I cannot dispute that all the droids are awesome in the Star Wars shows. So, anyway. The kids managed to convince this droid, SM-33 is the name of the droid, that Fern is their captain. And SM-33 has this idea of, hey, let's go to Borgo, I think is the name of the place, which is a wretched hive of scum and villainy. And by the way, it is actually kind of upsetting seeing kids in one of these places. They should not be there. Things really kick off when one of the kids tries to pay for a meal with an Old Republic credit. Another clue as to what the hell is going on at Aden. When they say they're from at Aden, no one takes them seriously, but they seem to know what at Aden is. And one of the characters reveals that it's like a lost planet of eternal treasure. So it's basically like Atlantis. Like it's basically like if you went up to people on the street and they're like, where are you from? You say, I'm from Atlantis. They would be like, okay, that's a terrible story. Like you need to tell me where you're really from, right? Like that's kind of what the deal is in this universe, which I think is kind of a cool dynamic. Like it's just not something we've seen in Star Wars before, right? Where people are like, I'm from this planet. I don't believe you. Like in general, when people say in Star Wars, I'm from, this random place, everyone's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But like a place that no one knows about, kind of interesting. So anyway, they're trying to escape, and then the droid comes in at the end and owns everyone. But before they are able to get free, they shoot the droid. Hopefully that's not the last we see of the droid, but we'll see. Droid, by the way, speaks like a ship, like a first mate on a pirate ship on Earth, by the way, I should point out.
I think that's part of what makes the droids in Star Wars so fun is they don't make any sense. Like, did he pick up a pirate model? You know what I mean? Does he adapt his language to the ruffians that he's like? There's an incredible amount of personality that comes out of the droid voices that don't really make sense for their functions. But it's what makes them such a joy. They're reflective of their personalities in a way that doesn't really line up with how you would probably program like this robot to, be helpful around a ship or something like that.
Like C-3PO, it doesn't make any sense why he'd be so...
Why would you program an anxious robot?
Fastidious, right? Like, it doesn't make any sense, right? Yeah, but that's what makes him so memorable, and I have no issue with that at all, obviously. But anyway, towards the end, we see the werewolf guy from early on in the episode. That's what I called him. Werewolf guy comes in. It's like, oh, that was the guy from early on in the episode. And he throws the kids into jail, and then they meet Jude Law, who's basically saying, get me out of here. My only request is that you take me with you. Now, hey, a lot of open questions. Like, if Jude Law can move keys by himself, why does he need the kids? It's almost like Jude Law might be searching for Aden himself, perhaps, and staging a way to get there. I'm just wildly shooting from the hip here. I don't know that any of that is accurate. But any other sort of scenes or shots or ideas from these two episodes, Patrick, that you want to call out?
It's just nothing like in particular stands out about any of the particular sequences in the show, which I realize is itself sort of like a pretty, but it's just, I just found it generally enjoyable. It just went down smooth. I had a good time with it. And I think part of perhaps your reaction to it is also just because of Star Wars has been unable to calibrate expectations for different modes it could or couldn't operate in. And it's obviously, I think upon watching it, you sort of realize it's a children's show. Did you know that going into it?
I had some sense based on what little I saw of the trailer.
Some sense. You know what I mean? Like, I think like it speaks to especially in the Disney era, like just a kind of gross inability to sort of, I don't know, like find different tracks with Star Wars and target those appropriately. And so I think that I think I got onto this show's mode pretty quickly, and I found myself often straight up just forgiving looking past lots of things that otherwise, like the thing about the like why didn't they just turn around? Who cares? Because it's more fun if they go forward. I get it. And like The Acolyte is not a show that show demanded like deep scrutiny and careful examination because it presents itself as a show like, hey, this is a show for adults, serious themes, like we're going to explore the complications and hypocrisies of the Jedi, and
completely failed to live up to that in my opinion.
Like,
right?
But lofty ambitions, like we liked what they were going for, if not the actual execution. And I don't know, I'm not trying to forgive everything that like doesn't hit on this show, but I just think part of Star Wars has trouble calibrating expectations for its audience. And I think that's because it doesn't know what its audience is anymore. And you see some of that even in Skeleton Crew, where if it was purely a kid's show, I think it would go even further with some of the stuff it was doing, but it is still straddling that line in a way that I think ends up hurting the show if it just leaned more into, we're just making a fun fantasy for like young people. What would you do if that was the mission statement? And that's here, and it's operating on that vibe, but it doesn't feel like it's all the way there. And I just think that confusion over what are we is Star Wars writ large at this point.
Great points, Patrick. And I think I would agree largely with what you're saying. Like, who is the show for? You made a great point earlier too about maybe this is like part of this big rollout of like, hey, we're focusing a bunch on the High Republic era now, right? Like, we're focusing a bunch on like all the stuff that happened prior to the events of Episode 4, you know, and so on. That it's like, oh wow, like we got the Acolyte, then we got Skeleton Crew. It's like, oh wow, this whole let 1,000 flowers bloom from the High Republic, and like now you're thinking about High Republic, and maybe we can tell a bunch of new stories from there now. You know, and I don't think it's played out as they had hoped because of how the Acolyte went down. Some of which was not even their fault, right? As we've discussed on the podcast. But in terms of this show and what it's trying to be, it is like, oh yeah, they are trying to attract a new generation of people, of fans into the Star Wars universe. And I think in order to do that, they are, like I said, stretching the Star Wars IP to like a near breaking point where it's like some of the stuff doesn't even make sense, in my opinion, in the Star Wars universe. I'm not saying there's no suburb out there in the Star Wars universe. Like, okay, fine, but it's just so clearly like we're just doing an 80s kids movie in the Star Wars universe, like to the point where, you know, they need to cock their blasters. and you know, we'll see how successful it is. But
and you could have done that without Suburbia, right? Like, even if they come up with by the end of the show, a perfectly acceptable lore world,
right,
like acceptable explanation, it's very clear they worked backwards from how do we explain the suburb because we want the suburb, as opposed to like the suburb exists because, oh, we had this idea about the High Republic and this world, and then what happens from there. I can't know, but it feels that way watching the show. And I don't think there's the bones of what this is like the story of Luke Skywalker, like would spread the story of Jedi, like it would make sense in the world of Star Wars for young children to like look at that as like their version of superheroes. Like I want to be a Jedi. And so using that framing as a way to tell a Star Wars fan story, like what if you got to go on a Star Wars adventure in the same way that like when you go to a theme park, it's like you get to go on a Star Wars adventure with all your friends. There is a theme park vibe to Skeleton Crew. Like there's a lot of story beats and sequences that feel like you could just adapt Skeleton Crew to like like a lot of the like what we've seen so far is like you standing in line and then like you get on a ship and like that's the ride that you go on with like this and
I was just at Disneyland, and it's like heavy Disneyland vibes watching it. Like when they get to like Borgo and like all the stuff that happens, it's like, oh, this feels like a ride in TV show form, really.
Right. And I think they could have gotten away, and maybe the show would get off on a better foot if it's like, well, there are kids, like just like Broom Kid at the end of Last Jedi, like there's kids out there who could be inspired and want to be like a Jedi, like a part of like, so you could have just done that story and they could have just been in a normal Star Wars town, like, but you wanted to do the 80s emblem, like Stephen King, Stranger Things aesthetic. So you invented a reason to put it in suburbia. And that that, even if they explain it, I think they would have, if they just stuck it somewhere else in a regular looking Star Wars city, you could have told a very similar story and it wouldn't have started out feeling so forced you could have gotten the vibes of the 80s without, like, the 80s weren't all just kids on bikes in suburbia. That's just one part of it, and it sticks out in our memories because of movies like E.T. and because of like things like Stranger Things that repopularized it. But I think that's what starts this off on a poor foot, and maybe they find a way to land that in a way that feels satisfying. But I don't really blame folks for looking at that and kind of rolling their eyes and then just falling off the show because they can't get over that hump.
Here, to the show's credit, I'm going to say this, Patrick Klepek. This show presumes that in the Star Wars universe, the only way a place like the suburbs in America could develop is if it was so isolated from the rest of the entire galaxy/universe that no one has ever seen or heard from it in ages. That's the only way you would develop a thing like the suburbs. Which is otherwise a psychotic way to live life. We shouldn't live all spread out like this, Patrick.
No,
I'm sorry. I know you live in a suburb.
Well, I don't have much choice. Like want to own house, live in suburbs is the long and short of it, David.
As far as we know, wealth inequality is not a huge deal in added this land of treasure. So like that means it makes even less sense.
They all got fancy houses.
Why aren't they living in like an urban Coruscant-esque environment? I really need to understand the economics of added in order for the show to make sense.
I will be. It's so like if none of that is addressed, it's like that's one of the most interesting questions you're raising in the show.
Right?
Is why does it look like this? And if you don't answer that, and I'd be genuinely shocked if the show didn't. It may not be the focus to the degree that you or I don't think the
show's going to answer it, Patrick.
You don't think it's going to answer it at all?
Like, okay, like why suburbs developed in this universe? Is that what you're? I don't think the show gives a shit. I don't think the show gives a shit about any of that stuff. It's just like, hey, what if we had suburbs in Star Wars? You know, that's the show is not concerned about any of those questions. I think it will address like what the hell is going on this planet at added,
sure,
and like,
sure,
you know, why they're being propagandized and all. I think it will address all those questions, but like. Why there happens and also maybe like it might explain like another thing that might actually come close to this is I think there will be some explanation of the technology in the show because the technology in the show is like more advanced than what we see in a lot of stuff during this like Return of the Jedi time period, right? Like
right.
So like I think there will be some explanations like why does this one planet have more advanced technology, which might then explain we have space buses so people can live farther apart. You know, like
I mean, I can see the suburban stuff could be explained by like uniformity, right? And there's like uniformity, in the whole formation of the planet, and thus the suburbs is itself an extension. You know, so I could see them getting there, but it obviously doesn't explain. But why does it look like a Chicago suburbs?
Why does it look like Levittown? You know?
Yeah.
That is not gonna be explained most likely.
No, probably not.
Those are our thoughts on Skeleton Crew. Patrick, I feel bad as usual. I feel like I've caused you to be more. I feel like I've caused you to be more negative on the show. than you would otherwise have been.
No, that you are just asking me to forcefully articulate what I like about the show, David. That is the spin I'm putting on it. Don't you feel bad.
Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.